Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey, and today I'm going to share Warren Buffett's lessons for young people during bad economic times, where at Georgetown University in September 2013, Buffett sat down and shared his wisdom with Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, where we can take inspiration from Buffett to get us through the bear market in stocks and also potential recessions in the US economy and around the world. And also, like Buffett mentions in this clip, he talked about his New York Times op-ed piece he wrote in October 2008 called Buy American, I Am, in which he wrote that, again, in the early 1980s, the time to buy stocks was when inflation raged and the economy was in the tank. In short, bad news is an investor's best friend. It lets you buy a slice of America's future at a markdown price. So if that also sounds good to you and you think that Buffett is the man, I hope you'll like and subscribe to my video and YouTube channel, and let's listen to this master investor's wisdom as follows.
Business has come back very well from 5 years ago when the panic hit. And it was a panic like nobody's ever seen. I mean, whatever you think about it, it was worse. I'm dead serious about that. We were right on the edge of the cliff. And fortunately, I give enormous credit to both Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner. And frankly, even though I didn't vote for him, never voted for him, President Bush. I don't know how many of you have studied economics, but in Adam Smith they talk about comparative advantage, and Keynes talked about animal spirits and all those people. But President Bush really came out with the great economic insight of all times, and he did it in 10 words in September of 2008. He went out there from the White House and he said, "If money doesn't loosen up, this sucker could go down." And I mean, that goes right up there. Tear down those plaques of Adam Smith. and he backed up those fellows. And so we've come back from it. But business has come back. A lot of companies are having record profits, including many of ours. And the American populace as a whole has not come back. I mean, inequality is getting wider. The Forbes 400, which just came out, showed aggregate wealth for the Forbes 400 of $2 trillion. You go back 20 years and that was 300 billion. So it's up 6 or 7 for one. It's different people to some extent, but this is the top. 300 billion to 2 trillion. And if you read the paper today, you'd have seen that the median income, is the same place it was in terms of real purchasing power. From 1989, it hasn't changed. So the inequality is getting wider. The rich are doing extremely well, extraordinarily well. And business is doing well. Business profit margins are terrific compared to the record historically. Business returns on tangible equity are terrific. But a great many people in our country, if you take the bottom 20% of households, that's 24 million households or something like that, housing, close to about 60 million people. It's the top level is $22,000. I don't want to try to live on $22,000 with a couple of kids. So we've got an economy that is delivering $50,000 of GDP per capita, and we've got an awful lot of people that aren't living well. So we have learned how to turn out lots of goods and services, but we haven't learned as well how to have everybody share in the bounty that we have.
So how do you think? Is that we just got to grow out of it to provide?
Well, we're growing. We're growing. Yeah. I mean, if you take even 2% a year, if you think about it, people feel very unhappy with 2% a year, but the population grows 1% a year. So that means 1% per capita real growth. That means in 20 years, a generation, there's a 20% gain in GDP per capita. That's not bad in a generation. Right. But the question is how it gets distributed. Right. But this country this system works. In my lifetime, I was born in 1930. I was conceived in 1929 because my dad was a stock salesman, and after the crash, he didn't have anything to do. Nobody. So I look back with great fondness on the 1929 crash. But since 1930. Since I was born in 1930, real GDP per capita has increased 6 for 1. Just think of that, 6 for 1. I mean, you went centuries when nothing happened. Right. for people, and this country works. I mean, I consider the luckiest person on a probabilistic basis that ever lived is the baby that's born today in the United States. I mean, it is a fabulous country, and the market system works all kinds of things. But we do have to, in my view, we have to make sure that everybody participates to a reasonable degree. We don't want equality results, but we also want a base level that's satisfactory for our people.
So you talked about the George Bush's statement, economic statement about they could go down. What do you think the lessons are of the last couple of cycles that you've seen from an investor standpoint? We've got a lot of young kids out there. You've lived through multiple cycles in the 50, 60 years plus you've been investing, 70 years investing. What are the lessons, and what, these are young people, what should they take away?
The lessons are that people will continue to make the same mistakes they've made. I mean, humans, and it doesn't correlate to IQ particularly. I mean, when they get greedy, and we had this huge bubble in the most important asset the American public has, housing. I mean, so you had a huge bubble in something that you could borrow heavily against. So you could run a margin account, in effect, on a house instead of stocks, and the conditions got very lax. And so when that bubble popped, but people came into that gradually. When they get fearful, it happens all at once. I mean, when people get scared, they all want to leave at one time. And we had them all want to leave at one time, and that'll happen again. It'll happen with a different set of circumstances, but the human animal will keep behaving pretty much the way it has in the past. So we will have periodic recessions. We'll have an occasional panic, which all recessions don't come from panics. But the good news is, if you look at the 20th century, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars. We had the Great Depression. We had the flu epidemic. We had the Cold War. We had the atom bomb. You name it. The Dow Jones average went from 66 to 11,497. With all these terrible things happening supposedly at various times, America works. And when I bought my first stock when I was 11, that was in the spring of 1942. And that was a couple months after Pearl Harbor. And we were getting clobbered in the Pacific at Corregidor and Bataan. I mean, the Death March of Bataan. And in the European theater, the Blitz of England was on. And the Dow was at about 100. But just look at where we are now. I mean, the country really works. The trick is, it seems to me the obligation of a society as prosperous as ours is to figure out how nobody gets left too far behind.
Right. It was interesting because last year Bono's speech was a lot about how America is a society of dreams and you can accomplish more here. It was actually one of the best speeches about the optimism America could have by a person who's not American by birth. So and I know you carry that optimism. So after all this, what makes you most optimistic for the next decade about America?
Well, just imagine, 1789. Just go back just a few hundred years. There wasn't anything here, in this country. And Sir Christopher Wren, I think, that designed St. Paul's Cathedral is buried there, and there's a little plaque there, and it says, if you seek my monument, look about you. Well, I say, in America, if you seek America's monument, look about you. This country has all come about in a few hundred years. We had less than 4 million people, when we became a country. China had 300 million people at that time. Europe had about 75 million. They were just as smart as we were. They worked just as hard as we did. They had natural resources that were similar to ours. And yet we ended up with a quarter of the world's GDP, a few hundred years later. We've got something that works, and we don't want to mess that up. We want to figure out what we do with this abundance better as we go along. But you don't have to worry about the system working. But you will have periodic recessions, and you will have an occasional panic brought on by something that who knows where it comes from. The thing to remember at that time, I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in the fall of 2008, and I said, that the country will come back. It'll go through a big recession and everything, but it'll come back, and it's coming back. So don't ever worry about America. It'll tell you, you're in the right place.
So you've been famous for your investment strategy on basically that follows the opposite side of that principle is invest when the chips are down and ride it up. That served you well. So what's your favorite time that you were able to accomplish that, when you caught somebody down and moved up?
I always think my favorite time's going to be tomorrow. it's always been fun, you know. And there's a company here in Washington called GEICO, you know, and I first got exposed to that in 1950. I was 20 years. I was 19 years. Well, it was 51. I'm sorry. I was 20 years old, and I came down here, and I came down on a Saturday because I'd learned that my professor who I worshipped at Columbia named Ben Graham was the chairman. I got down here and the door was locked. When I went to the building, because it was Saturday, and I pounded on the door, and some janitor let me in, and a marvelous fellow named Lorimer Davidson spent 4 hours with me teaching me all about insurance, and he helped me so much in life. You're going to get help by some wonderful people in life. It's a great thing to remember later on when you get to be my age, that, you know, all the help you've received from different people, because nobody does it alone. Obama got in trouble when he said that in the campaign, that, you know, nobody does it by themselves. Nobody does do it by themselves. We all sit in the shade of trees that were planted by others. So it's obligatory, I think, to plant a few trees ourselves if we've had good luck. It's been a great ride, but it's not over.
So you've owned. When did you actually buy GEICO? When did you invest in GEICO the first time?
Well, GEICO I bought. I met Lorimer Davidson when I was finishing up at Columbia, and then I started selling securities when I got out. And I went out to my Aunt Alice. And my Aunt Alice would have bought anything from me. And so she bought 100 shares of Government Employees Insurance. It was the first stock I ever sold. And then a lot of years passed, and Mr. Davidson was very kind to me in a variety of ways. But I went in different directions. And then in 1976, the company got in big trouble because they miscalculated their reserves, and they were going broke. And so I came back here, and I bought a third of the company in the market in a very short period of time. And then in 1995, by now our third had become a half because they'd repurchased their shares. And I went out to see Mr. Davidson, who was out in Bethesda. He was 96 or 97, and he had a bunch of stock in GEICO with no cost basis because he'd held it forever. And I said, Davey, if I make an offer for this company for cash, you're going to pay a big tax. And of course, if you die with the stock, you don't have that tax, and you get a stepped-up basis. So I'm not going to make this offer unless it's all right with you. And he said to me, he said, Warren, he said, I've hoped for this all my life. And so we bought the rest of the company. He was a great man.
And to expand on why GEICO, the car insurance company, is one of Buffett's all-time favorite companies is because when you're dealing in a commodity business like car insurance, you gain an edge or competitive advantage by being the low-cost producer. And they did this by having a direct-to-consumer sales model where they didn't have a need for a fleet of insurance people and office space and office people. And that greatly reduced their overhead because they mainly use the mail and phone to reach their customers. And originally, when Buffett was getting acquainted with GEICO, their original target market was this niche in government employees who were generally safer drivers than the average driver. And that helped them to drive down costs a lot because they focused on really getting a lot of these customers and then being able to be highly profitable in the specific market and then branching out. So they were able to gain market share because with this group of really good driver customers, they were able to gain operating profit margins of almost 30% while still offering their insurance policies at a 25 to 30% discount to the competition. And that's what enabled GEICO to be so appealing and have great staying power as they kept gaining market share over the years. And it's why Buffett's mentor, Benjamin Graham, loved this company, and why Buffett also loved it so much that it eventually got totally bought out by Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, and it's still part of Berkshire Hathaway and still offers car insurance. And today you don't have to be a government employee to get GEICO for car insurance, but that's not an ad, it's just an FYI. So if that was helpful to you and you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments what you thought. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time.